Welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus with Bob Mendelsohn.
Tonight we're going to finish as we study 1 Corinthians chapter 16. We've been looking for 15 chapters at how to get along with one another, how to get along with God, how to get along with one another and with the world in which we live. Paul's going to sum that up. Last week we looked at the great chapter on the hope of the community of faith, the resurrection from the dead. That is the pinnacle of his teaching in the book of 1 Corinthians. So after he gives this grand sermon, we'll say, he says, now concerning the collection for the saints. He comes right back to, don't be so high and mighty, don't be so ethereal, don't be so heavenly that you forget how it's supposed to work down here. Yes, we have a hope. Yes, our lives going to be different. Yes, Machayim Meitim is going to happen, has happened, is happening, will happen, and now let's get back to practicals. I like that about the apostle. He's back to practicalities, and he talks about three different sets of practicalities tonight. First, about giving. Let's talk about cash. Kesef. We're going to talk about dinero. Second, he talks about scheduling like time, how we plan our lives. And third, he's going to talk about working with others. So let's unpack this verse by verse. Concerning the collection, verse 1, as I directed the communities of faith in Galatia, that's where I'm going to teach you to. So there are 7 principles I want to give you about giving right from this text. Number 1, it's universal. Giving is not something that, only we do in Sydney or only they do in Corinth. This was done in Galatia. Galatia is a region, not a city. So all the different communities of faith are doing it. You're going to do it. Everybody's doing it. Number 1, it's universal. Number 2, it's systematic. On the first day of every week, each one lay aside. So don't do this randomly. I don't know. I just feel led today. I think I might give something. Nope. Every week you lay it aside. That's the way you do it. That's the way you teach your children how to save. That's the way your portfolio manager teaches you how to run your stocks and bonds. Every week, every month, every something, you're systematic. When you get a paycheck, let that first bit come out immediately. It's not yours. Let it be assigned to heaven. Number 3, each one of you, verse 2, is to put aside and save. So it's not just, it's the whole everybody. It's not corporate only. It's individual responsibility. That means 18-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 80-year-olds and everybody. I went to a Christian school here in Sydney to teach. I didn't attend a Christian school, pardon me. But I was invited to speak at a Christian church run by a particular denomination. And at that school chapel, the chaplain took up an offering. I thought, that's interesting. But there were boarders who were there, and there were all these students, hundreds of students. I thought, most kids that I talk to say, I don't have any money. But they're all over buying a Boost juice, a CD, and, they're spending loads of cash. People who don't have money, I'm shocked. So this chaplain instructed the kids while I was there, saying, giving is not an option. It's a command. It's like love is a command. I'm not going to say, if you feel like it, love's a command. And so is giving. So you're supposed to give. And he trains them from their youth to do that. I think that's fantastic. And they do have plenty of my cash. Every father has watched his children spend his cash. Well, there you go. But it's individual responsibility. And it's not something that you can say, the government does that or the Labor Party. It's my responsibility. Number 4, pre-plan. That it's determined. I've considered. He says in verse 2, on the first day of every week, each one of you is to put aside and save as he may prosper, so that the collections may be made when I come. In other words, there was a budget that was sort of known by each person. Now, the treasurer, think in terms of synagogue, the treasurer of the shul may not have known what everybody was going to give, but each person's responsible to know what they're to give. So I believe in systematic and spontaneous giving. Systematic, that is, I pre-plan. I know what I'm going to get in next week or last week, and so I've budgeted a certain percent. That's what I give. And it's not a surprise when an offering opportunity arises. I know what I'm going to give. Some places have envelopes. Some places have direct debiting. Whatever you're comfortable in how you give, it's fine. You do it. But be systematic. Number 5, proportional giving. Each one of you put aside so the collections may come. And when I arrive, whomever you may approve, I'll send them with letters to carry your gift to Jerusalem. There there's something about that phrase, as he may prosper, in direct proportion to my prosperity. So if I were living in, say, a sales position where I only lived on commission, maybe a draw and a commission, but let's just say you're on a flat commission. You are the salesman of jewelry and shalom mugs, right? And so you go around and you sell them to shops and stores and whatever. And this week you made $1,000 and next week you make $2,000. Well, you don't say, well, the minimum I can give. A generous person, which is what a responsible saint is a generous person. What can I give that is responsible to my family, responsible to my renting situation, responsible to government, responsible to God, and to the future? So you look at your savings, you look at your budget, you look at your family and all the responsibilities, and that plays in. There's room at the top. It's based on proportional giving. Now, I believe in tithing. Not everybody does. That's okay. But I believe in at least tithing. I've had people chide me, believers chide me. Tithing, that's Old Testament, 1/10. That's what the word literally means. And I believe in that because Abraham did it. I believe in it, which predates Torah. And I believe in it because it's sensible. It's a flat tax, which I still believe in and wish that every government would do that. It would save all the loophole business. It might knock out some accountants. I apologize for making your life miserable. But it would make so much more sense if the rich guys and poor guys, everybody gave proportionally. Now, I believe that. I've had so many believers say, you can't believe in tithing. It's Torah. It's Old Testament. It's done away with in Yeshua. And in fact, in the New Testament it says, give everything. So I ask every person who says that to me, it's great. What'd you put in the offering last week? Everything you got in? Or a portion? Well, that's between me and God, they almost always say. I say, fine. I believe in at least 10% between you and God. You work that out. So most of the time when people drivel their noise about, give everything, they're not even giving 10%. If every person in every church gave 10%, the amount of money available for folks globally to go out and serve is massive. I go to a church on the North Shore, and maybe everybody there is house poor. You know what house poor is? They own a nice house, they've got all their money invested in that, or their car, or stuff, and they don't have any money. So every week they say, I don't have anything. And that may be true, but I think they ought to revisit their mortgage. There's plenty of cash. In Sydney, we're ridiculously wealthy. Across Australia, unless you're in an Aboriginal community in the territory, there's a wad of cash. And if everybody were generous to the community of faith, then the community of faith would never have needs. And we'd be able to be generous as communities. So that's what I'm urging us to be. Number 6, without a showman to raise the funds, no pressure. This is great. It says, in verse 3, when I arrive, whomever you may approve, I'll send them with letters to carry your gift to Jerusalem. In other words, I'm not going to raise the offering when I come. I'm not going to be the bully. I'm not going to be the showman. There's not going to be any pressure. Whoever you want to approve, you've got a treasurer, you want to send him with it, I'll meet him outside. I'm not going to bully anyone into giving. That, when you've got a personality like Paul, is such a refreshing thing to hear. There is a desire on his part to say, you guys do what you know is right, not because I'm telling you and demanding. I go to certain churches, and it's shocking to me how countrywide and certainly internationally, where they will have 2 sermons on a Sunday. There's the sermon, whatever that is, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, whatever, which is the Bible unpacked. But there's a sermon before the sermon where they talk about money, and they'll take 10, 5, 10, 15 minutes sometimes, and then they'll pass the offering plates. And those pre-sermon sermons are all about money. Well, that's exactly what the apostle says he doesn't want to do. When I come, I'm just collecting it. I'm not going to move you to give it. And number 7, responsible administration. I like that when he says, whomever you may approve, verse 3. It's not my guy, it's your treasure. Not the guys I'm bringing in with the violin case. It's your boys. And you decide, and it's so wonderful to see the apostle who could command any number of things, withdrawing from the administration, saying, who do you guys want? Who are you guys going to send the gift? Beautiful. And where's the gift going? To Jerusalem. To, who's that? Who's in Jerusalem? James. And there is a whole community of Jewish believers who are poor. Some argue that they're poor for 2 reasons. One, because of the famines that were there extant in the 50s of that common era, and others because they weren't working like they should have been. I don't know where they get that, but it's fun to read the commentaries on this. Whatever the case, these are poor believers, mostly Jewish believers in Jerusalem. They say 70,000 people comprised the Church of Jerusalem. 70,000 Jews for Jesus. Wouldn't that be a cool church to go to? Which church do you go? I go to the church in Jerusalem. And who's your pastor? We have a lot of apostles. We have a lot of preachers and teachers. And they were, however, needy. So here's the apostle who says, I've been gathering funds in Galatia, but not for my work, not for what I do, but so that I could pass it on to the poor folk in Jerusalem. That is so beautiful. Love that.
Paul's got a great heart.
A beautiful heart. And he's passed that on to us pretty visibly so that we might be able to grab hold of it ourselves. It's not even given to the Salvation Army or to the Smith family. This is giving to God through the church here. Menachem is going to collect it. He's going to be responsible to pass it on to Paul. Paul's going to take it on to Jerusalem. It's tzedakah, which is righteousness or charity, but it's not only charity. It is a weekly standard giving that's built into the hardware, I guess software, of the believer.
But that happened back then you're talking about. So what about now?
This is still the principle. We should still be collecting. We should still be passing it on. So when we raise offerings, whether it's in the offering box up here or at the One New Man gathering last night, and people gave generously last night. It was terrific. And we're going to pass on some of that. We're going to use some of that because we are a receiving ministry, and then we can use it to pay for the shop. We had 3 Jewish people today who don't believe come in the shop. An Israeli came in right at 9 o'clock, like he was waiting for him. He wasn't, but it was like he was waiting for me. And his mother was over at the doctor. We get a lot of people visiting us while they're waiting for their wife, their mother, their sister at the doctor. It's wonderful. I should leave some of my flyers over there. And I think, no, this is exactly why people give to us, so that we can be responsible in ministry to the people who come in. But I think that that's still incumbent on the community of faith today to be generous in giving. Look, there was a scandal this week. I'm not going to stay on it, but it was a Christian man in Georgia who became a bishop in his church. It's a big church, about 2,000 people church. And he invited a fellow whose nickname is Rabbi from Colorado to come and ordain him, consecrate him, to do the religious ceremony with him. And this rabbi from Colorado, who's no Jew, and he's not Messianic, came with a Torah scroll and wrapped it with some friends around the new bishop in a very uncomfortable, if you're a Jew, way to look at that. Torah scrolls are not to be used as accessories, or maybe like a talus to lay over somebody. You know, that would be okay, but a Torah scroll is not for that. Well, there's buzz about this all over the internet. And one fellow who responded, Aviad Cohen, whose CDs are up there in the hip-hop section, put up a couple YouTubes already this week that I happened to look at. And Aviad was talking, he's a performer. He went to this Colorado church, and the rabbi pastor of the church raised funds for Aviad and for Aviad's father, who's not even a believer, but who's the president of a shoal back in New York, I think. Aviad is on camera saying that man's a charlatan because not one penny of that money did I ever see or my father's. Now, I heard that in light of my study on 1 Corinthians 16 and thought I'd bring that up. But look, there are people out there who misuse funds. They take funds, they don't pass it on. Having funds is not the problem. Keeping funds, not spending funds, that's the problem. So I don't look at ministries, big churches, little churches, big shoals, little. I don't care. I don't care how much money comes in. I care what they do with it. So the media loves to downwrap big, rich, fat cats. That's not the problem. I don't care how rich, how poor anyone is. A poor person can be cheap. A poor person can be lavish. A rich person can be cheap. A rich person can be lavish. The question's not what they have, what they have left over when they've spent their money for God. So that's concerning giving. I like the practicality of that. I like that it comes right out of the glorious resurrection hope. He brings us back home. Scheduling time, that's the second big section he's going to deal with. I love the way the principles of Bible are useful for us in determining our time and our giving and our working with others. So here he gives some principles, I think, by which we can make decisions for our own lives and our own time. He says in verse 5, I'll come to you after I go through Macedonia, for I'm going through Macedonia. Perhaps I'll stay with you or spend the winter, so you may send me on my way wherever I may go. I don't wish to see you now, just in passing, for I hope to remain with you for some time if the Lord permits. I'll remain in Ephesus until Shavuot, for a wide door for effective service is open to me, and there are many opponents or adversaries. Here's some more principles that I found, 5 principles. Number 1, immediate plans are short-ranged. I will come to you right after I go through Macedonia. I'm going through Macedonia, Corinth, I'm coming to you. I know that plan. The rest of it is up in the proverbial air. I know I'm going there. My short-term plans, I know. You could ask me, what am I doing tomorrow? I'll know a little bit. I know I'm going to come into the shop before 9 in case Avi comes back in. I know I'm going to stay until a certain time. I know certain things over the next week I've got on my diary. And then I know on the 19th I'm doing it. But after that, it's a little foggy. My immediate plans are somewhat fixed. I will go to Mendelsohn. March, April, we're going to make some plans. You asked me today what that is? I don't know. We've knocked around some things, fixing a couple things, but here's when James the Apostle's words come to play. Don't boast about tomorrow. You don't really know. Say, if the Lord wills, I'll do thus and such. Yeah, that plays into my thoughts. I can know immediately what I'm going to do, but way down the road, I don't even know. So I'm leaving that in God's hands. Number one, immediate plans are short range. Number two, flexibility. Perhaps I'll stay with you, or even spend the winter. Yeah, or maybe, so you hear this negotiation, and I like to use the phrase, blessed are the flexible, they do not break. And that's the way I've tried to live. I've got fixed things, but I'm negotiable. I'm like Bing Lee. I mean, you come in and you want to spend 15 minutes with me, and I'm here, but I'm doing other things. It's all right, I'll put it down. Flexibility. You've got to be able to have that in your life. I have this rule, personal rule, that anybody on the planet can have me for 5 minutes a day, to talk to me, to ask questions, to yell. 5 minutes a day. They may not get 6, but they can get 5. And that way I can be flexible. So if I'm with someone, somebody else comes and I say, well, he's had 5 minutes. You might not get 6. But anyway, we'll go on to the next. Look, that's the way I think we ought to live with one another. Flexibility. That way you're watching your favorite TV program, or you're going to get to the train at 6:02 or something, so that you can get to all your regular plans. But if somebody says, can we talk? Can we pray together? Can I listen to you tell me something for the next 5 minutes? That's okay. Blow your train. Be flexible. That's what that's saying. Number 3, God will provide along the way. Again, about money. Look at verse 6. It says, so that you may send me on my way wherever I may go. What does that mean? They're going to buy his ticket. Obviously, there were no tickets, but they're going to pay for some travel costs. They're going to fill up his satchel with bread and with beautiful muffins. So that's what they would have done. Fill up the satchel with some cheese and with some food, with some wine. Fill up with some gold or silver, something he could use. Salt was huge in those days. More wars have been fought over salt than gold, and now more than oil. The economy was based on salt. Kind of weird to think today. God will provide along the way. I guess that's something to be confident in. If you were a missionary, or you were going to go be serving God overseas, let's say you wanted to go be a minister in Ethiopia, and you had a contract in some way, some relationship with a community of faith over in Addis Ababa, and you said, oh, I want to come and serve there among the poor people, or I want to serve, there's still some Jews up in Gondar in northwest Ethiopia. Jewish believers are there. So maybe I could go there and serve. I've got enough to get me there, but I'm not sure that I'll have enough once I'm there. Confidence in God says God will provide along the way. I don't have to have everything raised. I can have faith raised that I can go. Number 4, Pentecost. It makes sense to us because it's Jewish and it's a nice little chronological marker, but it really would make sense if you were a mariner in Corinth. I will remain in Ephesus until Pentecost. What's going to happen after Pentecost? He's going to leave Ephesus. Well, if you know the seas, you know that no one travels on the seas until Shavuot, because it's winter and because the storms rise a lot more in early spring. So you wouldn't go out onto the ships until Pentecost. I remember in Chicago, which is on Lake Michigan, there is a huge marina, just like we'd see at Darling Harbor and out on the harbor here. But you could not put your boat, your individual boat, your yacht, your whatever, into Lake Michigan until the 1st of May. Why? Because freezes could still happen on Lake Michigan, and they didn't want your boat ruining or being ruined or whatever. So 1st of May, we were sure that all the thermal conditions would be right. So it was in Ephesus. My principle that I want you to get is that we choose times, sometimes on the basis of natural circumstances. Kings in King David's day would go to war. When? Because we read in the Bible that David went out when kings go to war. When do kings go to war? After winter. and maybe after planting, but certainly after the winter, because no king worth his salt would go out and have a war in winter. So natural circumstances determine some of our choice of time and giving time and being time. So those are important principles. Number 5 is a spiritual factor that is observable. I like what he says in verse 9, for a wide door for effective service has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. If we read the book of Acts, certainly chapters 17 through 19, we see the story of Paul in Ephesus. And he did. He had great effect. He had great opportunities to share the good news, and people responded. But there were also some major hostilities coming from our people. And we see that spiritual circumstances sometimes affect our choice of and use of time. I'll review those real quickly. Our immediate plans are short-ranged. We need to be flexible. God provides for us along the way. Use natural circumstances to determine your plans. And spiritual factors. Sometimes you look at spiritual factors, you say, the Lord led me here, and look what's happening. There's great observable response. He opened a wide door for us. That means a lot of folks are getting in on it, and I don't want to leave too soon. Or we read in the book of Acts, sometimes he went and nobody was responding at all, and he said, yeah, I'm leaving here. Third of 3, working with others before final instructions. Verse 10 and following, if Timothy comes, see that he's with you without cause to be afraid, for he's doing the Lord's work as I also am. So let no one despise him, but send him on his way, you recognize that phrase, in peace, so that he may come to me, for I expect him with the brethren. But concerning Apollos, our brother, I encouraged him greatly to come to you with the brethren, and it was not at all his desire to come now, but he will come when he has opportunity. Some great lessons here from these few lines as well. I want us to treat visitors well. I want you to treat visitors well. Every time you are representing God, wherever you are, at a church, at a meeting, at a Jews for Jesus club gathering, here at the bookshop, wherever you are, and you are in a spiritual circumstance, you represent God to people. So welcome people. Treat them well. Treat them like David Brickner walked in the door, or Paul Cohen, or anyone among you. Treat them with respect. Our Arnold Fruchtenbaum, he's coming at the end of March, and he will not be here, but he'll be speaking all over the traps. He's coming to Perth and Adelaide and Hobart. I got the schedule a couple days ago, and I called Paul Cohen, who organized all of it. Paul's going to be teaching us in a fortnight on Zechariah, which is, he's not going to give the whole book of Zechariah. He's going to give tidbits enough that you'll want to go to the camp where he and Arnold are teaching up at Maru at the end of March. Paul's going to be teaching. I want you to be generous to him and respect him. And when Mark comes back, Mark Landrum, I want you to respect him and listen to him and attune to him, and don't say, well, Bob's not going to be there. I'm not. I want you to go to hear Mark, that kind of thing. When I go places, I've got a phone call today from a pastor in Brisbane where they're flying me up. They're putting me up in a nice hotel. I'm speaking 3 times on the weekend, Easter weekend. They're paying for 2 nights at a hotel. They're going to take me to play golf on that Monday with 3 of the pastors. I mean, they're like treating me like Jesus rocked up. And I thought, that's exactly how we should treat people. That's what Paul is saying to the Corinthians. Hey, my boy Timothy's coming. Treat him well. And I hope that we do that for others. And you continue to do that no matter where you are. Let's see, accompany him on his daily. Give him a good place to stay. So let's look at these, again, some verses, 5 principles. Look for the unassuming. I like that about Timothy in verse 10. Now, if Timothy comes, see that he's with you without cause to be afraid. Timothy was a young man. And we know Paul considered him like a young associate, like a mentee. Is that a word? Mentor is him. Prodigy is another word. I think mentee is actually a word. I looked it up several years ago. So it's someone whom Paul is training in ministry. And Timothy, we know, has a couple letters addressed to him in the New Covenant. Beautiful to read. And in one of the verses, Paul said, don't let anyone look down on your youthfulness. I think he might have had a boyish face, even if he were an adult. I'm not sure how old Timothy was when he was taken along and they went over to Philippi. Acts chapter 16, we get introduced to Timothy. I'm not sure how old he was. 15, 20, 30, I don't know. But what I do know is that his mother and grandmother were still alive and training him at the time. But I get a picture that he had a boyish face. And so people would always say, oh, look, he's a fisher. What does he know? But I think he said, don't let anyone look down on your youthfulness. So now Paul is telling the people who might look down on his youthfulness, don't let him be upset at you. Don't let him be afraid. Don't let him be sad that he's come to you. Treat him well. honor the guy, not just the main apostle, but a junior apostle. Number 2, value him and his work, for he is doing the Lord's work as I also am. I like that. Paul didn't just think that his work was the only work. He's saying, I don't know what Tim's really out there doing, but I know it's God's work. Paul was passing on the honor that he might have received to his young associate. Number 3, don't be jealous of him. Don't despise him. Now, this isn't Paul's word to Paul. This is Paul's word to the Corinthians. Let no one despise him. Here he comes, a young fella, to the Corinthians, and he says, here's some words from heaven. Paul gave me some words. I've got some ideas. I want to pass them on to you. Let's have a meeting next Thursday. Would that be all right? Meet you at 6 over at the shop. And don't despise him. Don't be jealous of him. Don't say, Tim, what does he know? He's a young whippersnapper. I've been around for another year or two. I remember the grace that people had on me. Here I was, 20 years old, and teaching the Bible as if I knew anything. And here were these people who'd been raised in the church. This was in Lawrence, Kansas. People who'd been raised in the church who knew their Bible back and forth much better than I ever did and ever have. And they used to come and listen as I taught the Bible. And I thought, well, they should, of course, because I have the Bible and I'm good. But, when I thought about it later, I thought, gee, these guys were gracious. They were so gracious to listen to this young whippersnapper who knew nothing. I think those people were gracious. And I think that's what Paul's calling the Corinthians to be towards Timothy. Don't be jealous of him. Don't despise him. Number 4, send him on his way. Now, that's what I said before with Paul. Pay for Timothy. And Paul wrote to Timothy in one of his letters and said, let the elders who rule well be considered worthy of double honor. That has nothing to do with stand up twice as tall. That has to do with payment. Honor your parents has very little to do with respect, although it's included, but it has to do with paying for them. When they get old, you pay for them. Honor your parents. Honor the Lord from your wealth, it says in Proverbs 3. So send Timothy on his way. Pay for him too. And number 5 says, send him on his way in peace, verse 11. That means not send him on his way, get out of here, Timothy. But let him have shalom. Let him have a real peace about leaving, that it's the right time. Let him have a real peace about being in good relationship with you. Don't give him final bothers. I don't really like it. I'm on my way out of a congregation and I'm rolling my red cart and I've got books and CDs and I've just packed up and I've spent 3-4 hours there, whatever it is, and I've taught and I've sung and I've prayed with them, and then there's lunch sometimes, and then I'm on my way. Someone will invariably, once every few months, there'll be someone who will come up who will say, I just want to let you know and tell me something wrong about that church. I think, what's that for? 1, I'm not going to deal with it. 2, I'm not going to solve it. They're just little pests. What I'm saying is, we've had a spiritual time. It's one of a wonderful time, singing, praying, Bible, and walking out. And then somebody wants to. Paul is saying, let there be pest control. Get along, and get along in honoring God and honoring the people, and that's where I want you to be. And then he compares concerning Apollos, our brother. I encouraged him, verse 12, to come to you with the brethren, and it was not at all his desire to come now. He'll come when he has opportunity. Here's Apollos, who is another apostle, so is Timothy. And Paul says, I'm just like him, but I'm just like you guys. I encouraged him. I didn't command him. This whole idea of lordship is not to be found in the community of faith. You have one master, Yeshua said, and don't lord it over each other. That's the way the Gentiles do it. But you're not to be like that, he said. So here's Paul evidencing that in a beautiful way, where he says that Apollos can make his own decisions. I'm not going to command him. Be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Verse 13. I don't know how, ladies, you take that, but act like men. That's what he's saying. Be tough. He's saying to all the Corinthians to be staunch in your faith, in these principles and in the life that God's given us. And he appeals to, really, this isn't just the end of chapter 16, it's the end of the whole letter to the Corinthians. So as he's talked throughout the book, God's wisdom is greater than all human wisdom. And there were sins of division and bragging and competition and complacency. He's answered questions about weakness, about sexuality and marriage, about food and idols and freedom, questions about traditionalism and living in the Spirit and gifts and fruit of the Spirit, about the resurrection and eternity. He's answered all those things. In light of all that, act like men. Here we might just look at the Yiddish word mensch. It might be the best way to say it. Act like somebody that you'd want to be hanging around. Act like a proper person, a man of dignity and honor. That's what I want you to be, O Corinthians. And let it all be done in love. I like that. So it's a combination of strength and love, verse 13 and verse 14. That's how to treat others in the body. You got to be careful and you got to be loving. You got to be strong in what you believe and you got to be loving. You can't have one without the other. You have one without the other, but you have strength without love, you're mean-spirited. You have love without strength, you're just wishy-washy. You're mamby-pamby. You're sweet and just gather pests. But be strong in what you believe and be loving. And that's a combination that's unbeatable. Then he says, final instructions regarding Stephanos, Fortunatus, Achaicus. They supplied what was lacking on your part. This is great. I like that in verse 17. I rejoice over the coming of these three fellows because they've supplied what was lacking on your part. They've refreshed my spirit and yours. So acknowledge these guys. Remember they came to you in faith. Remember their love. Rejoice with them. They were able to spend time with Paul. They were the ones who brought the letter that he's answering. So here he is in prison. Fortunatus and Stephan, they come. They deliver the letter that the Corinthians first wrote. He reads it. They stick around. So he's encouraged by their faith. Then he writes the letter back, or they write it down and he signs it. Do you like that? Verse 21. This greeting is in my own hand, Paul. Some say that he had weak eyes from this verse and from a couple other verses, and that they wrote it down in the scroll, and he took his pen or quill or whatever, and this greeting, meaning this verse, this little scribble, I'm writing with my own hand, signed Paul, whereas all the rest of it was probably Sosthenes, who was attributed the writing first verse. This greeting I write with my own hand. If anyone doesn't love the Lord, oh boy, anathema, and then Maranatha. So we got a couple of Greek words that could play off each other. Accursed, anathema. And then Maranatha, the Lord comes, which is actually a Hebrew word that became a transliterated Greek word. The Lord comes, or the Lord is coming. Revelation, Maranatha, the Lord comes, which is the great hope of the community of faith. It's our refreshment. It's the thing that locks me in today to keep going for tomorrow. The Lord is coming. So back in chapter 15 and verse 58, the verse that ended the last week, he says, therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. That may well summarize knowing that Yeshua is coming, knowing that the resurrection is going to happen, knowing that he's greater than all these Greek wisdoms, knowing that he's greater than all the squabbles in the church and greater than all the freedoms and weaknesses that we have in food and idolatry and sexuality, knowing that he's greater than all that. Let's be steadfast, strong, immovable, always bound. I love the word abounding. It sounds like a little kid in a red rubber ball. It sounds persistent. It sounds continual, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor, that your toil, that your efforts are not in vain in the Lord. So it's going to produce some 30, some 60, some 100-fold. How great is God? So the grace of the Lord be with you. My love be with you. That's what he ends with. It's just a great, affectionate scribble that isn't out of nowhere, but out of his love and passion for Yeshua that he wants to pass this on to everybody else. That is 1 Corinthians 16, and that's 1 Corinthians.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia 2001. God bless you.